Welcome to the Firehouse Roundtable podcast, brought to you by the Ventura Fire Foundation. I'm one of your hosts, Peter McKenzie, retired fire captain with the City of Ventura Fire Department, and my co-host, Jason Kay, active battalion chief with the City of Ventura Fire Department. We are going to bring awareness to real issues that face firefighters and their families. We want you to feel like you have a seat at the kitchen table, which every firefighter knows is the heart of the firehouse. Let's get right into the episode. All right. Welcome to another episode of the Firehouse Roundtable. Today we have Julie Cart with Cal Matters, and we're excited to have you on. You've done some pretty amazing work surrounding firefighters and wildfires and things of that nature. But before we get started, why don't you take a minute or two to kind of give us a quick bio and tell us about the report, and let's do that.
Peter, I would say it's safe to say very few of your listeners know who I am. I work for Cal Matters, which is a nonprofit news site, and our job is to cover State House, the agencies within the state, and we put a pretty big premium on accountability. I'm a environmental reporter, and I work on long projects, and I did a 5-part series on trauma and PTSD particularly within CAL FIRE. Everything I wrote was also true for all first responders, as your listeners would know, but I focused on CAL FIRE because it's a state agency. So, that was the main focus of what I did, and that's where I work. It's calmatters.org. We are a nonprofit. And I should say that in case anyone saw the stories, not from our website, which is kind of the usual way people get to us, our model is we write our stories for our site and we offer them free to our partners, which are essentially every newspaper, TV, and radio station in the state. So they use it however they want.
Gotcha. Well, welcome to the show. Just for a little bit of background, believe it or not, your name and work has come up several times on our podcast because we focus on the mental health of the firefighters, and more importantly, who we focus on are the people back at home. So the spouses, the kids of the firefighters, and we've had people on connected to CAL FIRE for sure. And honestly, I think CAL FIRE is a little unique compared to other agencies in the state as far as like staffing and how much they work, their firefighters, those types of things, which we can get into, I'm sure. Yeah, you'd be surprised. I think your reporting resonated with a lot of the spouses at home who were like, hey, have a big problem here and nobody's talking about it. These guys are getting worked to death and all these things are happening and it's causing all these problems. And so anyway, I thought you might find that interesting that in our little slice of the world, your report has definitely made some good waves. Anyhow,
it's very nice to hear. You do this stuff, you work on something for a long time, and you just send it out into the ether, and you get the usual crank, annoying, evil media. We hate you. Anything you do. CAL FIRE didn't like it too much, but I hope just to start the conversation, and that's what needs to happen. Is the conversation needs to start. And you start the conversation by acknowledging there is a problem and calling it something. I hope that helped.
Yeah. How did you even arrive at like, hey, I'm going to research this and I'm going to give this some attention? Like, what did that look like?
Well, it's been quiet. You hate to say it's been quiet in the fire world because that ensures that something blows up or explodes. But I've been noticing for these last quiet years, but you go back to 2020 and be earlier, how different the language is. When you're on my side of things, we talk to fire commanders regularly when there's a really severe fire season. Both the U.S. Forest Service and CAL FIRE would hold weekly calls and say, here's the outlook, here's what's happening, this is what we're responding to. And I've been on those things for 100 years. Every reporter in California has covered fires and understands somewhat the world of firefighting. But I started hearing these guys talk about how tired their units were, how, they always complain about staffing. And I don't mean that, cynically, but a lot of time when you hear folks high up in organizations talk about things like that, that's a signal for budgets and hiring and things like that. This was more of a sincere our people are tired. They are stressed. They are struggling. And you don't hear that a lot in the fire service, at least publicly, public facing. And that struck me. And I was talking to my editor about that. And she said, well, let's write about it. Kind of easier said than done. So to answer your question, Peter, it started because I started hearing about stress on the line, and then started pulling that thread just in my mind. What does that mean? That means that's a safety issue. It's a public safety issue. It's a safety issue for firefighters. What are the implications of that? And then I just sort of dove in.
Gotcha. And how long did this work take to create? How long did this project take?
It took a number of months, and I'm lucky to be given that kind of time. It's a real luxury. And in this case, a necessity. Mental health doesn't get discussed in this country. There's a stigma, unfortunately, attached to it, which is wrong, but it is. So add to that what you all know about the fire service, which is the mythology, brave firefighters, they do things. I run the other way. They run toward things. So it's kind of crazy. And the imagery and the iconography about being a first responder doesn't really give people much room to say, I feel bad. I saw something. It makes me upset. My friend, all that. So I knew that I believed I would have a lot of trouble starting. And it became the most interesting and surprising part of the work was I would talk to one guy. I didn't only talk to men. I'm just going to speak generically here. I would talk to one guy. He would hear me and kind of, hopefully, I'm just a normal person. I'm there to listen, I do want to write about it. And I do want to use your name. It was very important for me to not have any anonymous, we call them blind quotes. And I'd spent whatever time was necessary. If I had to go somewhere to meet him for coffee, I met him for coffee. And if I had to call 3 or 4 times, we did. And once that person trusted me, it became like a baton. He said, well, I used to work with a captain who did X, Y, and Z. And then I'd get someone else and someone else. And what I came to realize was, because they told me, they were talking to me because they all said, I don't want this to happen to somebody else. I don't want anyone to feel what I feel. I don't want their families to have this burden on them because of me. And so that became, their extension of public service. It's not that I'm so fabulous and everyone wanted to talk to Cal Matters. They wanted this information, this help out there. And that was very, very powerful to me. And it shows you what a brotherhood you all have.
You have an interesting perspective, arguably someone who doesn't know all the inner workings of the fire service and all the culture and the unwritten rules and all the things that go along with the fire service in general, which are relatively complex. And you dove in on honestly, one of I don't want to say a dirty little secret of the fire service, but it doesn't get the spotlight that it deserves, right? So what was your perspective as a layman, I guess we could say, who didn't come from within the fire service, who then dives in? You probably had some preconceived ideas of what the fire service was before. How to compare and contrast that to what you know now? And was the preconceived notions that you had then, did any of that pan out, or do you see it totally different now? I know that's a really convoluted question, but hopefully you got the gist of it.
I do. Those are my kinds of questions. Knock it off. I would just say that I don't think it would be unusual to know. I don't think you have to be an insider to imagine that people in the kind of high performance type A world that firefighters live in would have stress and trauma and not talk about it. So it's not as, it's a secret in terms of how it's dealt with. And there's no public discussion of it, but that's not surprising. It's true. In fact, a lot of my early research dealt with the military, and in fact, CAL FIRE and other first responder organizations do adopt some of the techniques that the military has adopted and developed. But to answer your question, the secrecy that's just goes hand in hand with mental health issues in this country. So that was expected, and I found that to be quite true. What bothered me a little bit, to the extent that I'm allowed to have an opinion in my work, was the sort of hypocrisy of at the highest levels, the commanders and folks in Sacramento. We take this really seriously. We're going to take care of you. Look out for your buddies. See something, say something. There was all this nomenclature around it, but I didn't see anything that proved they took it seriously or meant what they said. Example, I talked to lots of folks who said, you are encouraged or told, tell me about your problems. Tell your supervisor. They know that you say to your boss, that burnover just really got to me that happened to those guys. And I'm having some trouble. I need to take a little time. The boss will grumble. You're a gold bricker. You're a faker, whatever you want to say. And okay, you get the time, but the boss now thinks, I can't trust you. The folks on the line can't trust you. Anyone in your truck can't trust you because you're weak, because of all those other things. So there was kind of a retribution. There was a fear that if you reported these things, your rise in the organization would be stymied. There's a very clear I'm just going to use these really cliched terms, old guard, new guard. The old guys just said, and I do this in my world, you tend to do and think how you were trained and what you did is the correct thing. When I was a kid, I did this, or when I was trained, I did this. Pull your pants on and get back to work. And if I did it, or if I withstood that, or if it was good enough for me, why are you complaining? And that's very common organizational myopics. It's just wrong. But I found that to be true. And then there's just no superstructure. There's no bureaucracy that supports. Let's say you do have the courage. Something happens. You have to have the understanding that this is a trauma. This is a problem that has to be dealt with. And that's a whole nother hoo-ha. Then you say, okay, I'm going to tell someone about it. Then they say, okay, go get some help. What's out there? And so what I found, getting back to my now belabored point about what I saw about the hypocrisy, in the early days, and that's not that long ago, at least with CAL FIRE, what I investigated, there were 4 or 5 people that you could talk to. It was triage, and they did not, it was very helpful, better 4 than none, but that doesn't give you a sense of the scope of the problem, which was much larger than 4. Then you had to find, there's medical workers' comp, there's all these hoops to jump through. And we can go into that if you want, but it's just the whole system was stacked. Once you heard anecdotally from other people and you just went, to hell with that. Why am I bothering? I'm just going to go drink. I'm going to drink.
Yeah, you're speaking our language. So one of the things that we do, our whole foundation and nonprofit's mission is to take care of, firefighters when they're struggling and their families. And a lot of it's related to PTSD. The problem that we see is, okay, we are having this conversation in the fire service. 100% is happening now, but it kind of stops there. So we've had people on our department that go, hey, I have a problem. And then the whole goat rope disaster starts where how do we actually connect this person with a mental health professional who's going to sit down, who understands their issues and get them help? And that is unfortunately, the gap that we need to fill in the fire service, because it's not easy. Even with this conversation going on for the last couple of years, it's far from perfect. In fact, our little fire department here just recently got a contract with a mental health organization that can finally get people some help. So I hear what you're saying, and I don't disagree with it at all. I think there's so much more to be done. I know when Jason and I got hired, we were not having this conversation at all. And in the last 5 years, we started having a conversation, but the people that are running these organizations are from that old guard, and it's slowly turning over. And I think it's progressing in a direction it needs to progress, but we're definitely not there yet. That much I can echo for sure.
Well, look how you even said it. You said PTSD. CAL FIRE says PTSI because they think that nobody wants to say they have a disorder. And so better to call it an injury, so that's okay. Cause, there's injuries on the fire line all the time. Everyone has a bad back. Their knees are blown out, all the problems. So that's okay, because it's kind of a toughie thing. But in a disorder or disease, I don't want that. So, that you're starting from your back foot if that's an issue for you. And then it's just, as you say, it's a follow through. And when I started looking into workers' comp, which I didn't want to do, it's just a morass. But you look at, I talked to experts, mental health experts in this area, and they said to find a person who understands what PTSD is and to understand how to treat trauma and even define it is a Herculean task. And if you're in, tiny town California, where a lot of these folks are based, you don't have 9 hospitals in your area where you can find, a mental health care provider. It's just, there's obstacle after obstacle after obstacle. And anyway, you said it. There are barriers.
Quick story about workers' comp. In fact, we were just filming a podcast yesterday with a colleague that Jason and I used to work with, who had a very crisis mode PTSD situation for, stopped working months and months and months. Workers' comp denied it, all of these things. Luckily, this guy pulled through and kind of came out on the other side. And we were talking about his story. And I have a mentor that got me into the fire service down in San Diego, almost very similar circumstances, started going down the PTSD route a lot, because a lot of these symptoms are not the same, but they're for the most part similar. Filed a workers' comp claim case. Workers' comp immediately denied it. And I was so angry because he easily, if we would have had our systems in place and better organization and all the things we're talking about were there, he probably would be alive. Luckily, the guy we were interviewing yesterday, Nick, our guy we used to work with, he just didn't quit. He was like a pit bull. And when they told him no, he went and barked up some other tree and eventually got the help that he needed and came out on the other side, which is like, I feel like that's the system's problem. Like, they killed this guy because of how messed up their world is, and workers' comp, all of it.
We're 18 minutes into this podcast. I haven't said anything because I'm just appreciating your guys' conversation. I appreciate that you went out on a limb, Julian, and you wrote this paper. And I have
I
questions.
didn't. That's my job. Yeah. That's my job.
Well, but you were willing to stick your hand up and go, hey, there's a problem, where I don't think many people were in the past. And I think what a lot of the things that you're saying go back to, there is still a stigma in this country. And there's definitely this dividing line. And I think Peter and I are kind of, we're probably, hopefully, kind of the last of the generation where there still is a stigma on the mental health thing. And I really am hopeful that the next generation sees it as more of, regular, I guess something that they can reach out and ask for a hand with. And it's not seen as such a negative just to reach out. A couple questions I had for you. Did your paper talk about suggestions that you gave, what we can do, what CAL FIRE specifically can do when people come and raise their hand and say there's issues?
The last piece was intended to, there was a progression. There's a problem. I think I said it was a 5-part. It was actually 4. Sorry. I have my own PTSD, let me tell you. But so the first part was to say, here's the problem. The second part looked at one particular firefighter. The third part looked at someone who had suicidal ideation and really struggled and finally got help and is now one of the people who are counselors, even though they're not called that, for CAL FIRE. And the fourth part said, okay, there's a problem here. Look how it's affecting people. It's awful. Now what? What is the state doing? What is this agency doing? And, you can't, you're right, Jason. So what are some options and what are some pathways when your conclusion is they're not doing anything and they're not doing enough? The answer to that is you have to take a first step and they're not really doing it. And it's a very California government response. They're going to throw money at it. They're going to say, okay, one, I mean, when you get into the wonkiness of it, some of this can be mitigated by shorter work weeks and not being out as long as firefighters are. And even if you're a county firefighter or a city firefighter, you're going to see and experience those traumatic things. There may not be a function of the fact that you're the 10th day on your job or something like that, but money is not always the answer. It is showing a sincerity that is consistently implemented of we think there's a problem. We don't need some stupid reporter to tell us, that there's a problem, or some kind of person outside our organization. We know there's a problem. We are going to face up to this, just like we do a lot of very difficult things, and we are going to follow through. And so the follow through, is to deal with the hours, to have more counseling available, probably external to the organization, to give some anonymity and comfort for people to tell their stories, and to make it so that you don't have to hire a lawyer to get mental health care, which a lot of people have resorted to. I mean, it goes on and on. So the answer is, we didn't actually, it's called solutions journalism. Everybody wants we say these horrible things are happening because that's news, but we never get around to saying, well, here's some good stuff. Here's something that works. I couldn't do that in this because there wasn't anything. Although I would say, if you want to get into this part of it, there are examples of it being done well. And two approaches I took when I was particularly talking to state officials. And to me, this is about caring about people, having compassion, and that should kind of like be it. But if you want to look at it from an efficiency standpoint, I talked to a business consultant. I didn't put this in the story. It just, there's only so much space. But he said, this is ridiculous. What does it cost to send a person to the fire academy? What is the institutional memory and training? This is so important in the fire service. You have to assume someone who's been on the job 10 years has more to offer and is more valuable than someone who just came out of the academy, all things, being equal. That experience you only get from being on the job. Is it an efficient use of money to have those people at the top who have all that experience, who can save lives of other folks, save property, resources, etc.? Is it smart to have them constantly leaving to go to, either retire, do harm to themselves, or for whatever they're going? It's an inefficiency in an organization. You want to keep those people. So that should matter to you. And it was very hard to get statistical information from CAL FIRE, but I did find out that I guess it was 2021 or 2022, there was a 10% turnover in their workforce. You just can't have that and think that you are an efficient organization that does things well, or a program of attraction where people say, hey, I want to go there because look how great it is. When you see people running out the door, it's not cool. But the other thing is, and I said it to CAL FIRE, and it's a terrible way of presenting it, but I said, how you guys, your response, and this is true for all state agencies, is they go to the legislature and they say, we have this huge problem. We need more money. So CAL FIRE doesn't collect those statistics. It doesn't have data. So it goes to the legislature and it tells these sob stories. Ooh. And I know this is a horrible way of presenting it, but they are making their case, but it's anecdotal. The legislature has very deep pockets and they pull out tons of money, especially for firefighting. But they say, wait a second, show us that there's a problem. Give us the data. What are the numbers? CAL FIRE doesn't have it. So it's very hard for them to go to legislators in California, who are often very sympathetic to any firefighting need, if they haven't made their case. It's just a lot of those things have to happen. They need to kind of make it a business model where they say, we're taking care of our people. We care about them, all that stuff. But you're my employee. I want you to stay on the job. I want you to be healthy. It's the same reason that corporations, have some anti-smoking programs and weight loss and all that, not because they love their people so much, but because they're on the damn job and they're working. And, I think that's one way of looking at it.
So you think it's a failure of the administrators at CAL FIRE to put some teeth behind this and crunch some numbers and present a case and put some effort behind it? I mean, is that essentially the path you're going down?
Well, it's my training is not to make a statement like that. I find people who say it and then I put it in the story. But I think the conclusion, and again, this was a year or so ago, and I haven't done the follow-ups that I intend to do, but it definitely was not in place. There was, I agree. I mean, I think they said, we're going to look into this and this is sure a problem, but you can't be serious. You cannot change something when you don't understand what the problem is. And they haven't done that yet.
Yeah. I would say, a lot of other departments hire CAL FIRE's firefighters because their schedule is different. They work harder, they get paid less, all those things. And they all know it. And that's not shocking to me that you found a 10% turnover of their people, which in the fire service is unheard of because most people get the fire department job. They stay there for 30 years and then they retire. Like, it's not normal to have that kind of turnover. But you mentioned one thing early on in our conversation, and you said that CAL FIRE was not happy with your report for obvious reasons. Like you were definitely shining some light on some problems. Speak to that? What did they intentionally do anything? Was it just a feeling you got? Was there some nefarious actions against it? Like, what did that look like? What was that?
Oh, you mean the guys who came to the door with the Pulaskis? No, they were, I mean, I don't want to project. I think it is embarrassing. And it should have been embarrassing for ignoring a problem, not having the problem. That's where we differ. I don't think they should have been ashamed or embarrassed at all that this problem exists. It underscores the difficult work these folks do and what we're putting them through and on all of our behalf. So that kind of makes the case for, brave firefighters, aren't they wonderful, which is the way they like to portray things. And it's accurate. But I think they were embarrassed because I came to them at the end, of course, as I had gathered, information and kind of presented my findings. And they didn't have any data. So you talk to the CAL FIRE chief and I said, you don't collect data on suicides, yet you're agreeing that it is a crisis. How do you know it's a crisis? Based on what? So they didn't like that. And I understand that. I was just told by some of the folks I talked to that they were unhappy, and I'll leave it at that. I don't want to, out anybody, but
sure,
it's not surprising. I don't care if they're mad at me. It would be nice if things changed.
Yeah, I know. I can't imagine they would be happy with that report, but honestly, I think the report was good. I mean, it did what you wanted it to do, which was shine some light, start the conversation, and start heading in a different direction. Do you have any data or information that indicates it's getting better, that your report made a difference or anything along those lines?
The quick answer is no. I was up in Boise a couple of months ago and I was at NIFC and in that big building where they pack all the parachutes at the federal agency. And we were in just a big room, and every room in any kind of agency like that, there's a bulletin board, and every bulletin board and every fireplace has look out for these things. And it had a mental health, call this number. And that's not because I wrote anything, but I do know that there's more awareness of that. And on the federal side, this is what unions are for. As you know, the federal firefighters in the Forest Service and Interior and other agencies are trying to get raises. And part of it is they need to be paid commensurate with the work they do, but also to incorporate this kind of mental health access and things like that. And so that's helpful. And I do know that there were a couple of pieces of legislation that made it through that should help things a little bit.
Hi, I'm Austin Folk, an engineer with the Ventura City Fire Department. I'm also on the board of the Ventura Fire Foundation, an organization that supports firefighters and their families. The foundation produces this podcast as part of our mission. I worked with the foundation because I was witness to the help that it was able to provide to my family. The foundation needs your help. First, please subscribe and rate this podcast on your podcast platform. This helps us get a higher ranking and more visibility for the show. Second, if you support the podcast and the foundation's work, please consider donating. Every dollar helps us support firefighters and their families. There's a link in the show notes where you can donate through the website at www.venturafirefoundation.org. Thank you for listening.
Did you research any of the impacts on the families, or was it mainly just on the firefighters themselves? Was there a component?
Well, the firefighters told me I wasn't successful, let's say, at talking to some families. And we have such a narrow mission sometimes at Cal Matters. We're so wonky and, into the weeds on things. But I had to keep my eye on the actual state employees. But I'm a taxpayer. I'm responsible for that person. I mean, that's a person who works for me, or at least on my behalf. So, if they're not doing their job and part of it is family, then that's a problem. And in other words, the time away from home, the self-medicating with drugs, drinking, and to my great surprise, but it shouldn't be, pornography, all the things that happen, guns, down rabbit holes on the internet and things like that, where people go to kind of lose themselves or to just zone out, whatever that may be, whatever your choice is. That means those are solitary things. You're not including your spouse. You're not including your children. I heard a lot of stories about that. Fire captain telling me 80% of the guys, men and women in his firehouse in 1 year were getting divorced. I mean, that's a small sample, but I think I think it probably carries through many, many, many other things. And again, looking at this from just sort of a hard, callous viewpoint, if you think about people who are carrying that kind of trauma or anger sometimes, they're not doing their jobs well then, probably. They're making bad decisions. And when I make a bad decision, usually I get embarrassed, I spell something wrong, or I get something wrong. It's not the end of the world. It's not good for me, but but it's not the same as a fire commander making a decision that doesn't just impact his or her own well-being, but groups with you, public resources, all those other things. The implications are very big. And when I mentioned that a really good resource for information on this stuff is the military, they're the ones who found out, who have changed a lot of things because of the families. I came from a military family, 2 brothers, and my mom said, my brother Mike was delivered by a dermatologist, my brother Alan, a dentist, if you live on base. Now there's an accommodation for, I guess your family's there. We need women's health care. And now more and more women in the military. So the military understood the same things we talked about, which is we spend all this dough to train these people. They're carrying these, especially now, extremely expensive equipment. And, this is very lethal stuff. We want them to do their jobs well. And they were noticing all the people who were leaving. The families didn't like to travel and drag their kids to Germany and then the Philippines and all that stuff. And they now have some methods to deal with that. They're very focused on families, again, because it costs them money for people to have problems, to be off the job or to, get out of the service because of all that stuff. So the military was really, interestingly, a good laboratory for this stuff and some models. And for example, especially special forces, this is similar to small units in firefighting. They do stuff together, absolutely rely on each other for their own safety and the safety of everyone else, and to complete their mission. And things are different now. It's like fire. the fire behavior is so off the charts. The size of the fires, the ferocity, all the stuff, not understanding. It's analogous to what's happening in wars. And those guys now come out of like a unit of 10 Navy SEALs. They killed a kid. They accidentally did this or they did that. And, it's war, but it's very difficult for them. And I'm not saying that it's the idea that your job is inherently dangerous. There are horrible things and you have to do them. And, we don't want to lose you. And so they have come up with a lot of tech. They do yoga, they do special breathing. They talk about things, and it has made a difference when, a Marine or a Navy SEAL comes in to talk to a group of people. They're like, oh, well, if that guy can get on the floor and stretch or say on a pillow, then that may be, it's more your peer group. But anyway, that the military is very understanding of the role of families and keeping that harmony and keeping families together.
There's a lot to be learned for sure. And obviously the fire service is modeled after, it's a paramilitary organization.
It is.
Question. We asked this question to a lot of people that come on the podcast, mainly people connected to families and therapists who are culturally competent, who have practices around counseling firefighters and their families. And I'm very interested, and I'm interested in your personal opinion, knowing what you know now with the research you did and the view that you have of the fire service and all these issues. If you had all the power in the world to do one thing for CAL FIRE or for the fire service in general to make this better, that would have the biggest impact, what would that one thing be? And I'll share with you what the answers we get from other people as well. But I am curious because you have, arguably a very unique perspective. So
there's so many ways to come at that, but I'll take the easy one. You have to talk about these things. That's the big thing. It needs to be not, a 30-minute seminar when you're going through training. It needs to be talked about all the time. Firefighters constantly talk about lessons learned after action. You look at a situation where something happened. It's very important to the fire service. Let's discuss that and take it apart and see what we could have done differently. Why not include, even if it's just goofy, you sit around and say, oh, I felt bad about that. I mean, yes, but if your longest serving, most experienced person said, yeah, that I couldn't stand to see that kid's house burned down and he was crying about it. Or, I mean, that's the probably least serious thing, but it's about discussing it. So it's not a secret. And of course, then you have to do a number of things, but it has to be out in the open.
Gotcha. Interesting. Yeah. So better awareness, better, open communication about it. So you know what the number one thing is that people say? It really took us by surprise. The number one answer we get: work less.
Yeah.
Work less. And
that's what all those guys told me. That
resonates with me, and I'm sure Jason too, because all of the bad things that firefighters, military, police officers all deal with, I don't want to say maybe it's manageable in small doses, but if you have it coming at you 25 out of 30 days a month, you don't get to go home, you're in all these high stress situations, like it makes it that much worse. And I tend to agree, like just work half of what you work now, in some departments like CAL FIRE, that would still be less than what you signed up to work, right? That it would make a big difference. But I don't discount awareness and what you brought up as well, and there is no one solution to this problem. If there was, we would have solved it already. Like it's very complex and there's a lot. It's a government, right? It's like there's a lot of it's impossible to make the government change on a dime and do anything, right? So anyhow,
no, that makes perfect sense. If people go to the series and they look at some of the videos, that's what they talked about. I mean, that was you're right. That was my particular spin on it. But they all said, I cannot. If you have 10 days off, 7 days are in your cave of whatever, however you process it. And then 3 days, you go throw the ball with your kid. So definitely. And, but my point, I'm going to bring up my point again. When they're home, at least it's just you at least understand what you're experiencing. You're not a weirdo. You're not weak. You're not defective. You say, okay, I'm experiencing trauma from this thing, perfectly normal. How will I process it? Maybe it's beer. I don't know. But at least that's the start. And then when you are home and when you get out of the station and you're not just marinating in all the stuff that you guys work with, then at least you have some tools. And I think it's also important just to underscore what you said about it. It's a difficult job. You see a lot of really bad stuff that you wish you could unsee. You're not going to be able to. And it's hard work and it's stressful. That will not be taken away if you work a 4-day work week. Those 4 days are going to have all that stuff in it. But it's like you say, it's decompression. You've got to get away.
Yeah. Jason, you haven't said much. We've been running this conversation. What do you got?
Well, the human
you're a blabbermouth.
Work brain needs to be turned off. And I think we're saying that. I think Julie is saying that. I think that most of the people we interview, at some point, you need sleep and you need a break. You need to be able to go home and not be preparing for the next call. And I think that kind of sums up everybody's side. Some of the stuff you said today was really interesting. When Peter asks, what do you think is the one thing? I don't think some of the people, including myself, if I was asked that question, I don't think I would say work less because it's not allowed. Like, how is that even an option when they're all mandates? It's allowed maybe if you're picking up shifts, but most of the people who are ready to work less and who are ready to have some kind of a mental health crisis, they would be home if they were allowed. And when you're told you're not going home and you will be staying tomorrow, that is, such a rut. I think that how do you get away from that? How do you get out of it? And you guys both touched on, if you call in sick or if you raise your hand and you say, I need a break, the stigma's right there. And you're not helping out the department. You're not helping out the quote unquote brotherhood. And you're still seen as a lot of guys, I'd say more than 50%, are going to look at you and say, you're making my life harder now. Do your part. So it's just
because it has to be backfilled.
Right. It's just
you have to backfill.
Yeah. I really liked, Julie, when you said when you're angry or upset, you make bad decisions. And that's very true. And I think as a paramedic, that's huge. Doctors don't, get 24 hours straight. And then let alone as a fire commander, like you're saying, making bad decisions for, hundreds of people potentially who are on a significant fire. Earlier, you talked about PTSI versus PTSD. One of the therapists, I said PTSI once, and she said, don't say PTSI because then I can't diagnose you. PTSD is something that I can treat and diagnose, and it's actually a diagnosis. Where PTSI is more, is it a sprained brain? Is it no big deal? Or is it a big deal? And then you have to go down that rabbit hole too. Finally, I want to talk about CAL FIRE is huge. Our little fire department is small, and I do think that we've made a lot of headway versus what CAL FIRE is going through. What we've talked about with the Dear Chiefs podcast, ladies, I don't think we deal with some of the stuff that they deal with when it comes to the CAL FIRE families that they're dealing with. But we are far from perfect. We see departments around us that are doing better and departments around us that are doing worse. But I think CAL FIRE specifically has a huge epidemic of this. And all of the issues we're talking about, their peer support team isn't close to them because it's just a huge department. When you say we're going to implement something positive for the guys, you're talking about thousands and thousands of people as opposed to 100 or a couple hundred when it comes to a smaller city like we deal with. So those are kind of my comments and the things I've been reserving for when you guys took a breath. So I appreciate you letting me kind of talk about that. The other one was, you talked about the Forest Service as a federal fire department. That was my first job. I came through the Forest Service, and you reflected and reminded me that I think I was making $7.50 an hour when I was in the Forest Service. And then if you were called a forestry technician, because they didn't want to have to pay you as a firefighter. So if you went to a fire, they paid you an extra $1 an hour because it was hazard pay. So that was just a memory, and I'm sure they're nowhere close to being caught up. But yeah, I mean, the nuance of this conversation is great. We could talk about this for hours and hours.
Yeah. Julie, I got a question about your Pulitzer Prize that you won. So we've never had someone on the podcast that's won a Pulitzer Prize before. So what was that for, and what happened after you won the prize? Like, did everything change, or what was pre and post Pulitzer look like for you?
That was when I was working at the LA Times, and I was with my colleague Bettina Boxall, who covered the Forest Service. This was back when journalism was healthy, and I was a public lands writer, and we had specialists doing all kinds of things. We decided to look at how the United States, so now this is the federal side, not the state side, how we fight fires in this country. And because we were in Iraq, we started looking, we saw the analogy that we could make between how we fight wars. We outsource it, we hire contractors, we throw a lot of money at it, we throw technology that may or may not be successful, aerial firefighting, various things like that. So we decided and we broke it. That's the 5-part series, not this last one. And so we looked at particular fire that year and used that as a jumping off point to talk about various things. And part of it was how flammable, particularly Southern and Central California, with canyons and no dispensable space and ingress and egress and stuff like that. Kind of wonky stuff we wrote about. Bettina wrote about cheatgrass. I went to Australia to write about how Australia approaches fires, and they're the great researchers in the wildfire space. They're amazing. It's an interesting, I don't know if you've all talked about it, but it's really amazing what they do. And I'm married to an Australian, my husband is, so I understand the culture, and very similar, the climate similar trees in some cases, lots of eucalyptus, et cetera. Anyway, so I wrote about that. And then I did a story about aviation, and learned that to some people, retardant drops are called CNN drops. It means, you have to appear to be doing something, because another secret in firefighting is sometimes you can't do much. You cannot stand in front of a 100-foot flame length. You will not do that. So a lot of the stuff is waiting for weather and things like that. So you have to look like you're doing something to save my house because I'm a taxpayer, and rah, rah, rah. So we mainly looked at a lot of money, and that involved getting public records, and it was pretty amazing. You'd like to be the person who writes something that shines a light on, and then it gets fixed. Well, there was sort of arm waving in Congress, and again, people hating us. That's just it. And that, I think the people in the fire service know the fire service, and they know all the, where all the bodies are buried, so to speak, and know what could fix it. But it's a very complicated world to try to explain to others. And so I wouldn't say that anything happened. I mean, my life changed a little bit, but we don't care. I mean, who cares? But I think that in terms of understanding more efficiencies, what's more safe stuff, it's okay sometimes to let things burn. You can't say that because people go crazy. We can cut some trees. It's all right. Our watersheds are still okay. So everybody knows that. That's a whole other thing. But there's some things everyone understands, but for some reason they never get traction.
Yeah. As a journalist, what changed winning the prize? What changed it for your professional life?
Well, every time I spell someone's name wrong, everyone says, "Ugh, who does she think she is? She thinks she's so hot. She can't even spell." You're a little bit of a target. No, there's nothing, absolutely nothing bad about it. And it's, I've done some travel because of it, and it's not a bad thing.
Awesome. One follow-up question. I don't know anything about how Australia fights wildfires. Briefly, What is the difference?
The difference is culture. Here we say, I pay my damn taxes. I want a fire truck in my driveway. And if I live in the Lake Tahoe Basin and I have a shake roof and a redwood deck and a bunch of firewood, stacked against my house, and I haven't created a defensible space, and I have pine stuff all around, it's not my fault. You got to come and help me. Australians are not like that, maybe yet. They don't sue. They are from kind of a culture. Of course, they're newcomers. They're not the original people, but they got their bootstrappers are saying, okay, no one's going to come to save us. What do we have to do? And also, it's a nation of 20 million people. I live in Los Angeles. There's 20 million people here, so there's not, and it's a huge continent, very fire prone. So quickly, they don't even pretend that they're going to get to you. What they do is they found through research and science that people actually trust. It's another difference. They said more people die running from fires, trying to get away, particularly too late, thinking they can outrun fires, than if they stay and defend their home. So fires, looking for something to burn. If you go in your house and you prepare externally with a defensible space, your house is a very safe place. It is extremely frightening for a minute or two, and the fire burns over you and then goes on. If you've prepared your home properly, they're the first ones to talk about screens in the attic, the finer mesh so that embers don't come in, embers going ahead and understanding that you're sitting, in a town that's 20 miles away, and you're thinking, too bad about those poor guys. And that fire is now upon you because of the wind. So they train people to defend their homes if they want to. And they do train them, and they scare the crap out of them and tell them, all these scary things, and they go through stuff. And then they say, okay, it's called leave early or stay and defend. If you're not willing to do that, if you're not capable, if you don't want to, get in your car and get out of there when you're advised to do so, because we're not going to be there. And they also have a real shortage of water available for fighting fires. So, in these discrete areas. So people actually, and it has the largest volunteer firefighting force in the world, and they're very well trained and very experienced. So the difference is they are able to say these kind of scary messages that you couldn't say in the United States. No firefighting force, you're in your town, you say, we can't help you. Sorry. That doesn't fly.
Yeah, that ain't gonna fly. Yeah.
No. And they do that. And they also empower people, and they're on farms, or ranches, and they all do this stuff for themselves for the most part. And so I'm generalizing, but we're talking about bushfire. So, people living up in the Sierra understand fire and take care of themselves in that way too. But, these are people who they studied it. They understand it. They underground wires so they don't have the utility line fires that we have. And when they have something, which they recently had, that it was just an unbelievable summer, their summer of wiping out wildlife and hectare after hectare. It's just a come to Jesus with fire. They have a coronial investigation. They get together and they say, what the hell just happened on a federal level? And then they do stuff. They have blue ribbon commissions that instead of saying, they put these things out and people don't, give it all this time, and there's input from scientists and all this stuff, firefighters and all these experts. And then it goes to the government, and the government doesn't say, well, thanks for sharing, and pitch that away. They actually implement things. They do things. And that's the difference. There's a disconnect. They study it and then put it in place. And we are, because of our legal system, because of the expectations of people, that it's always going to be someone to save us, sometimes from ourselves and our own, stupid headedness. So very different.
Very insightful. I mean, why would we assume that the government would do something with something they spend a bunch of money on? So,
yeah.
It was
a fun exercise.
Yeah. What's next? You obviously, you studied wildfires, you studied CAL FIRE and PTSD. What's next on the horizon? Anything related to the fire service, or are you in a different spot now?
Well, I just wrote 10,000 words on floating offshore wind, if you're interested in that. But I did just read an article about it up in Morro Bay, that they're fighting it, and it's 40 miles offshore or something. Anyway, not to go down that rabbit hole, but so it is. No, you don't get far from fire in California. I'm an environmental reporter, and it's the gift that keeps on giving. I mean, we will always have it. I've spent a lot of time lately writing about the way California has a sense of technology to the rescue. It's going to be AI, it's going to be drones, it's going to be all of this instantaneous mapping. And, and that's another example of the old days. We would throw a map on the hood of a truck, and instead of now using iPad or stuff like that, there's some of it that is without a doubt. I mean, in terms of weather data, topography, fires and fuels and all that stuff, really, really, in the moment of use. But I think we do tend to want to fight fires at a distance, especially wildland fires, and with machinery and things like that. And there's plenty of companies who want to make some dough, believe me. So the reliance on technology and where that's going to take us, if it's useful things are useful things, but it's just like the military. It goes back to what we wrote about at the Times, that we look to that instead of, it's just, it's ground pounders, boots on the ground. It's also being, again, having that conversation of saying, we are not going to stop this fire. We're going to herd it. We're going to say, okay, good. Let's let it go over here and burn somewhere, so we don't have to do a fuels reduction project or something like that. So,
well, Julie, I applaud the work you did. I think it was very impactful. It started a conversation that is hopefully the beginning. But yeah, great job on that. Thank you for coming on the show. We're happy to have you. And it was awesome to get the behind the scenes kind of insight with the report and the articles you wrote. So thank you very much.
Well, it's been my pleasure. And once you get into that, as you all do, understanding the problems, it's just hard to let go of it. I mean, I do have people contact me from time to time, and there's not a hell of a lot I can do other than say, I feel for you, and maybe direct them, but, and I'm sorry, it's still a problem.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's going away anytime soon.
No.
And I think the biggest benefit that your article did is just having conversation and getting it started. Now we just need some follow through, right? So I appreciate you coming on the show as well, and having conversation about it.
Thanks, Jason.
Wow, that was a very insightful conversation, just to hear an outsider's perspective. A lot of times reporters aren't the most popular people to the fire service because a lot of times they get stuff wrong. I think for the most part, she hit the nail on the head when it comes to the problem that exists. What do you think?
Yeah, as much as she's an outsider, she had a lot of firsthand knowledge of the fire service. You can tell she dove in to get the experience and the knowledge that it takes to write a paper with a lot of information. It was really good. I really liked her quote, "When you're angry, you make bad decisions." I think that says a lot towards PTSD and people who have been at work too long, overtired and upset at stuff, and going to make bad decisions. And as a firefighter, that's a bad thing for sure.
Yeah. Even if she didn't get everything 100% right in her report, I think overall it started the conversation, and it went down a path that is positive. And yeah, so I was glad we brought her on the show. I think it was helpful for sure.
It's definitely hard to take on CAL FIRE. That's a big ask. Those guys are a huge agency with a ton of money. So I applaud her for taking on that battle.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Jason, till next time.